Hi Freddie, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to another edition of Top 7. Now in this series we invite wargaming celebrities onto the channel not to talk about the top 7 games that they have designed or worked on, but their top 7 wargames that they enjoy playing. And I'm happy to say that today's guest is none other than Volko Ruhnke. Volko is an esteemed wargame designer who has titles such as Fire in the Lake, Wilderness War, Nevsky, Labyrinth, A Distant Plain. He's the founder of the Coin series for counterinsurgency games so popular with GMT, as well as the creator of the Levy Campaign series that has spawned a number of offshoot games as well. This video is sponsored by Noble Knight Games. Now they're a board game retailer in Wisconsin that sell and buy new and used war games. So if you have games you're looking to sell, they are a source for you to get some money or store credit for. But if you are looking for out-of-print games, and some of the games that Volko will talk about in today's episode are games that are currently out of publication, they can be a great source for finding that odd game that is no longer available in your friendly local game stores. The link to Noble Knight Games is down below, and if you do use that link to make a purchase, thank you very much, as it does help out the channel. Our conversation today wandered over a number of topics and went to considerable depth, so I've decided to cut this interview up into 2 pieces. There is a video link to the second piece at the end of this interview. And with that, let's get started. I'm joined now by Volko Ruhnke, who is our guest for today's show to do his top 7 war games. Volko, thanks so much for joining today.
Hi, Mike. Great to be here.
Great. Shall we jump right in and get started with number 7? Now, these are, just to clarify, these are top 7 war games, historical simulations. And we're going to do a little bit of a twist here too, right? It's going to be, we're going to talk about the game, and then we're going to talk about one play modification tweak that you actually make to the game when you play it too.
For many of them, yeah, sort of my adjustment to taste, or others that I've heard about out there, but ones that I do tend to use, yeah. And they're not for all of them, but for many of them, yeah.
Fantastic. All right, let's jump in with number 7.
All right, so when I do my favorites, when I think about favorites, I try to cover genres also, so I've tried to sample them. So starting with Crusader Rex. So the Columbia style block games, the way that goes back, what, half a century or more, and it's something that we know and we accept, and it's so brilliant how simply, with simple tools and clearly and effortlessly, hidden information and attrition, accounting for attrition, are incorporated on these, turning the blocks with the pips. And so this is part of a trio that all involved the designer Jerry Taylor. And this is, of that trio, my favorite. And this is the one, I think it's the block game I have played the most in my life. And that was true even before it was on Rally the Troops. When on Rally the Troops, where I started to play it so much that it was one of the few cases in my life, this happened to me with Paths of Glory too, where I'm playing this so much that it's like wrecking my social account or whatever, I've become obsessive. And so when that happens, I sometimes actually have to kind of go cold turkey and say, right. So I actually like purpose to stop playing this game because I was playing it too obsessively. Anyway, so another thing that the Jerry Taylor trio and a few others like Julius Caesar in this line from Columbia do, in addition to using the blocks for limited information and easy attrition recording, another thing that they do is they do incorporate action cards. So it is in a very light way, card driven. And you can see the connections between the CDG genre and blocks that's melded in here. There's a few events. There's 1, 2, or 3 actions from the cards. It's very light and not oppressive. You're not really focused in on the cards the way you might be in a real CDG, but it's there and it adds.
Yeah. Sometimes I call it card enhanced gameplay.
Yeah. However, I would say here, it isn't just like events that your actions are driven by the cards. So in that way, I think it's fair to say there's a card driven element. It's just very simple. And again, clever, because cards also determine who has the initiative in a way that works very well. And one thing that I drew from this one in particular is the mechanics in Crusader Rex for castles and sieges and battles and the like actually influenced my own mental model of medieval operations involving castles and fortifications.
So that shows up in the Levy Campaign then?
So that shows up in Levy Campaign in terms of kind of what my assumptions are about these dynamics. You'll see those similar dynamics in Crusader Rex, but presented in a much cleaner, more accessible way than I achieved in Levy Campaign.
Well, you're going for a different thing with the Levy. And for people that aren't familiar with the Levy Campaign series, what might be kind of a brief synopsis of that series?
So the Levy Campaign series looks at medieval warfare at the operational level in different settings, much like Crusader Rex does for the Third Crusade, but with more detail in terms of the feudal system and command, and also logistically, and also somewhat tactically, because there are different troop types that you're mustering. So there's a lot more emphasis on muster. And I'm just giving you a quick example to contrast. So Crusader Rex, muster, you're kind of drawing a random block from face down blocks. Very, very simple. You get a certain number and you draw them and place them. There's some twists on that, but very simple. Muster and Levy Campaign, it's who are the lords and what type of resources for their army are they drawing together? This is the levy part of Levy Campaign. There's more, detail and flavor there, so that you get a sense of how did these lords, these leaders, relate to each other socially matters for how they fielded armies, right? So that, and then the logistical part where we are, so in a typical block game, if you're either in supply or you're out of supply, and if you're out of supply, you tend to like lose a pip, something like that, right? Very, very simple. Logistics is in there, but it's very simple. In Levy Campaign, you're actually accumulating and spending specific amounts of stuff, of food, which I call provender, or carts to move the food around, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. For me too, I like games that make logistics fun and make it a part of the game. And so that's one of the things I really like about, I played a fair bit of Nevsky, and I've really enjoyed that, where it's like the logistics are such a huge an important part of historical simulation and just the history of warfare. And most games simplify that to the point of, and not that's a critique, you focus on certain things, but it's focus on certain things. But but the idea that this is a part of the game and it's fun, and it's also a key determinant of who's going to be victorious in the end. It's really fascinating.
I'm the same way. I'm sort of fascinated, and more lately at the operational level, in two things: hidden information, reconnaissance and that sort of thing, and logistics. What's the stuff and how do we move it around and consume it? And the good news is, while you're on Rally the Troops playing Crusader Rex, you can pop over to Rally the Troops Nevsky and try that out.
That's right. It's there too.
You don't even have to own the game or read the rules. You just play.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to try Crusader Rex now on Rally the Troops. I've not played it yet. So
generally, I've played it rules as written, and of course, if you're on Rally the Troops, it's rules enforced. So I do that. So I play it. I play rules as written. It has a reputation that it's the Crusaders and the Christians who are already in the Holy Land, and they're called the Franks in the game. And then the Saracens are the Muslims who are, counterattacking under Saladin. And the reputation out there is that it favors the Muslims, right? And so you can I have generally played it as is, and I've played it a ton. I'm not a great player. So I tend to, against an experienced player, I tend to lose whichever side. So I don't really notice that balance question as others might. But if you start to play it and you feel like, gee, the Franks need some help, you might start them with one or a couple Crusader blocks already available, give them a head start on how quickly the Crusaders arrive, because the clock on the game is years. You're playing a certain number of years, but the question is, the Third Crusade is coming. The Christians are there defending. The Saracens under Saladin are very potent and are attacking you. And can you survive and hold out until the Crusaders, who are quite potent, arrive from England, France, and Germany, or some of those. And they're kind of coming in as you draw blocks, as they're mustering slowly in Europe. So they take a while to come in. And how quickly that happens is a little bit a matter of luck, but it's also a matter of what casualties you're taking as the Christian. It's a very neat, simple connection, simply implemented, but complex in results, sophisticated interaction between how well you're doing holding off the Saracens and how quickly the Crusaders, because the Crusaders, they don't want to jump in on a losing cause, they're kind of coming to make something of it. So if you do better and you don't have as many casualties, you're actually more likely to get more Crusaders. Anyways, so that's a key, variable in the two sides. So you could help the Franks a little bit by giving them a couple of those Crusader blocks starting out already. They're not going to be able to come in right away, but they'll come in sooner. That's what I would do. That said, I have almost always just played it as written.
Played it as is. Yeah. All right. Shall we move on to number 6 on your list?
Okay, very different. There's a genre called Hex Encounter you may have heard of. So I do want to.
Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, and I will tell you.
I'm just kidding.
Although I used to, and I grew up with them, nowadays I do actually not play that many Hex Encounters. So that's just my just so people know what kind of my style is. But this one is definitely that. The Burning Blue by Lee Brimcombe Wood and from GMT Games. And it is about, as you can see, it is about the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe versus RAF Fighter Command and Spitfires and all that. And so what makes this one special? So Lee Brimcombe Wood, who is a very experienced designer, both from the board game and electronic games side, is very disciplined also in terms of historicity. His model of what is historically, I think, the first integrated air defense system is very loyal to the reality of it. That's number one. And he's very strict with who you represent. What do you actually control at your level? And so this is different from, there are so many great Battle of Britain games, but most of them basically do the Battle of Britain, right? This is, or you're down at Down in Flames. You're at the tactical, Rise of the Luftwaffe, dogfighting level. This is at the operational level, and it is at the kind of lower operational level. And Lee calls this raid scale. RAID, raid scale games. And he's got several. Downtown, which is also excellent, which is the Vietnam War over North Vietnam, Rolling Thunder and Linebacker. What he does is you're not running the Battle of Britain. You're running the raids on Britain. If you're the Luftwaffe, the raids on Britain for this morning. Here's your targets. Your targets are assigned. Here are your available squadrons. You plan operationally how you're going to hit the targets with the planes you have available. And on the RAF side, here are your ready fighter squadrons, and it's up to you, when to launch them where, and you're guiding them, right? And if you imagine the control centers and with the uniformed ladies with the long sticks pushing, the markers around, you're doing that. And it actually even looks like that. So he's really putting you in that command center. And then from there, there's a lot of really cool design that if I had read about it ahead of time, I said, this is not going to work. It's just not going to be fun to play. But it is. Before I give you an example. So the Luftwaffe player secretly draws these targets. And by the way, there are these little chits you can draw the targets from. They are all actual historical raids. Like he tells you in there, this raid occurred at 10:20 a.m. on September 3rd, 1940. I mean, it's right, but you're drawing them randomly. Obviously, the RAF doesn't know what's going to be hit this morning, right? Anyway, so you get these raids, and now you plot out, like on paper, you plot out, here's how I'm flying in. This is my point where these bombers are going to turn. Here's where they're going to drop the load. Here's where they fly out again, all of that stuff. And then when you play, you're like on rails. You're basically, as the Luftwaffe player, you're just executing your plan. against
Because
your
in essence,
opponent.
you've sent the aircraft up. You don't have control over them anymore. So it's kind
Right. The bombers are going to fly where
modeling
you
that
told them
level of planning. Yeah.
Exactly right. Now you have a little bit of control because you are able to do some dummy flights over France to try to fool. There's deception in this, to try to fool the RAF and kind of wrong foot them about where you're forming up to send your bombers over. And then you have some control. You have some free Feierjagd, some free hunter Messerschmitts that you can, make some tactical decisions a little bit here and there. But for the most part, you're sitting there watching your plan unfold and your opponent across the table react to that, because you're generally trying to fool them, right? You're trying to
Right.
I'm going to fly this way, but I'll suddenly turn here, and now all your
Right.
guys are flying over there. And is it going to work? And so I thought, that's not a lot of player interaction once I'm there. I love playing the Luftwaffe because it's that aspect of I do the planning ahead of time, and now I'm going to see, can I fool my buddy, and get him to send up too many planes or fly too many east instead of west, or to mistake my big swarm of Messerschmitts for a bomber raid and engage. And now I'm going to, fight him and shoot him down, because you can do that as well. And then there's a very original way of using cards. This is card assisted, I would say, that Lee uses cards to determine what the RAF player knows. Because the whole defense for the British is based on these radar sites, these early warning sites. But the radars, of course, they're primitive radars compared to today. And you might see 20 planes that are actually 100 planes, and you don't know exactly what altitude they are and so forth. And it might be that it was just some air activity over France that was staged to fool you, and they're not coming over at all, etc. All of that is in there. And you're drawing detection cards. And the way that it does it is the Luftwaffe player, the RF player is getting the information, but the Luftwaffe player draws the card, and the card will tell you what the error is in what the radars or the observers, because they're also visual observers, have detected. And the Luftwaffe player, is then able to communicate some fuzzy information.
Right.
I mean, it's all nice. You're not making a decision. You're reporting what the card is telling you to do, but it's a very slick card-assisted system, so that the RF player gets a gradually crystallizing view of the raids coming in. And it's a very cool experience from the RAF players, because you get these first initial indications. And of course, the Battle of Britain is on, that they're coming, but is this real? Is this not? Is this big? Is this little? Are they high? Are they low? All that stuff. And as you go on, your detections improve gradually, right? Realistically. And it's just it's a model of, so I used to do air defense analysis as a living long ago, so I had the special.
This is right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, kind of it is,
A different time, but yeah.
Different time, downtown is a bit closer, although also earlier. I'm not that old, but a lot of the fundamentals are there. And so it's very exciting to see it play out on the game table. And this is just to me, such a convincing, explicit model. And it's a serious war game. It's a heavy hex and counter game. And I will say, when I first got it, I read through the rules. I had to put it aside for about 6 months because it was so different at that time from other games.
It sounds, I mean, the one I'm familiar with is RAF, the Battle of Britain, but that's more the campaign of the Battle of Britain over the whole scope and span of it. This sounds more at that day level. The game is the day levels raids. And
I'll tell you, a day is a campaign.
Okay.
It's actually like the second raid of this morning, Tuesday morning's second wave.
So it has a campaign element in it, and you string it together.
It's still operational. It's not tactical like Down in Flames, but it's raid scale. So it's like the lower, and
that sounds fascinating.
In that more narrow slice of level of warfare, Lee is very disciplined, right, about the decisions you're making, which just, I find so admirable. And I then discovered, so I played this a lot face to face. I then discovered just playing it on Vassal is actually great, because first of all, the vassal implementation is great. But then I discovered doing the Luftwaffe plots, instead of using different colored pencils, I just do them on paint, in MS Paint. And I make these beautiful, here's your
Okay.
here's your attack plan, and your egret. And it's just, and it makes it even more, because it's like a fun thing to plan out these raids, even though you're doing it on your own ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, I knew nothing about that game. So this is fascinating to hear that. It's a completely different concept than I expected. And I'm thinking too of games I've experienced, but there's not much of experience quite like that. I'm picking up pieces of like the old Luftwaffe game from Avalon Hill and some of the search elements of like Pacific carrier warfare.
Yes.
You can report false information or deceptive information or partial.
Right.
Yeah.
And if somebody gets into the Burning Blue, then there's Downtown, Vietnam War, and there's also Bomber Command, which is the British nighttime raids, over Germany a little later in the war. Yeah. And so I do play with one adjustment to Lee's model. And it is that I have found over time that the RAF is a little underpowered in my view. And there's one, I think, very clean adjustment that handles that sufficiently. So in the game, there are like large formations and small formations of planes. And the premise is that large formations of planes have more durability. And what's happening, planes are being shot down here and there, but what's really important at this scale is dispersing a formation. If you disperse bombers, they're not going to be able to bomb a single target effectively. If you disperse fighters, they're not going to be able to do much either. And generally, what would happen is an RAF squadron would hit a Luftwaffe formation. There'd be a bunch of dogfighting. And when you start dogfighting, you get spread out all over the sky into, ones and twos and threes and so forth. And then you just basically, you can't be guided in on the target anymore. It's just a mess. And anyways, you're probably out of ammo and fuel. And so you go home, right? So anyways, all of that is in the game. So that what's really critical is the disruption of the formations, right? But if you're a large formation, a large Luftwaffe formation, you can take 3 disruption hits before you're done. If you're a small formation, like just say 4 fighters or something, or a half a squadron for the RAF, you only can take 1 hit. In between that are the British squadron. I think they're like 12 aircraft represented, something like that. In between those two, and as written, they also only take 1 hit. I think they deserve to have a durability of 2. So that the
balances
British
the gameplay better.
I think it balances the gameplay, and it seems like a smoother curve of saying there are small and large RAF units. The large RAF units should get more disruption hits than the small, just like on the Luftwaffe side.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Shall we shift gears a little bit?
Sure.
And we'll go for, instead of jumping up quite to number 5, I'd like to kind of go a little bit to your own designs. And the question for you is, what was your hardest game to design? And then also kind of a follow-up, what was your easiest game to design? And you can define hardest and easiest as you like.
Right. Yeah. That is, I will say, a tough question. I think I have to, for the hardest, I have to split that into 2, because it depends on kind of what part. So I find, and this may show in the quality of my work, so this is probably not going to be a surprise to people who know any of my games. I find solitaire design to be extremely hard. And I don't know if it just inherently is hard. I suspect it is, or if it's just my, particular mindset. And I'm kind of proud of the fact that when I was doing solitaire bots to replace players, there was not a lot of that kind of thing already on the market. So I'm talking here about Labyrinth and then the Coin series. And there had been, of course, solitaire games going way back, and John Butterfield being the master of that. And then he has that capacity. He can do, a Battle of Britain game that you can play 2 players, and you can play it all. You can play the RAF, and you can play the Luftwaffe, and it all works. I can't do that. So when I did Labyrinth, it was, I'm interested in the 2-player game. That's why I'm doing it, CDG. And that's how I was thinking. And it was Gene Billingsley who said, well, if nobody wants to play the terrorists, they have to be able to play the US. They have to play the counter-terrorists, the good guys, against a solitaire, you know, if you've got the guts to design that Volko. And I said, okay, I have to set that challenge. But I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I just kind of whipped up my little, you know, penciled out a sort of here's a flow chart for what the jihadists might reasonably do. And I put it in the box, and that was that. Andean Abyss, I think, was the hardest for me in that regard. Not so much the main game, the 4-player game, which I think, you know, I fell into place fairly readily for me. But I had the ambition there, if I can do it with one, you know, replacing 1-player Labyrinth, by gum, I can do it to replace 3 players in right. Andean Abyss. So you can play Andean Abyss, and if you want to, you can do it alone as if you're playing 4 different players, and they're all right. going to be run by these flowcharts. Okay. And that, but I was on my own. I mean, I didn't have at that point anybody helping me. How do you do this? And that was the thing, being on my own. Later on, we did a lot more of them, of course, and they, I think, got better and better. And now they're totally different than they were back then, and they're much better using cards instead of flowcharts, etc. But that was all with other people either working with me or taking it on their own and doing things smarter than I could back then. This was really me, you know, and I'm like, well, the FARC is going to do a lot of marching around in Andean Abyss. How do I march guys around, you know, in a realistic way? That took a lot of sitting and
that's also the first coin counterinsurgency game as well. So you've got a new system and the solo bots on top of that. That's a monster to design. Yeah.
And not just designing those mechanics for Solitaire, but how do I communicate that? How do I represent that on a player aid? What should the flowcharts look like? What should the cards do to amplify that? How do I explain it in the rules and not have it be this massive amount of rules text and so forth? Anyway, and I think it was like partially successful, you know, and that's the thing, that if I'm not succeeding fully and reasonably happy with it, then it must have been hard, right? So I think it was okay. And people have used these bots. And what it did, though, was it started that collaboration, Labyrinth, and then especially Andean Abyss, where people got interested in how do we do this better? And it got better. And now it's like, it's expected. Like, I can't, you know, if I do Coast Watchers, it has to have Solitaire, of course, you know, because everybody does Solitaire systems for, you know, well, back then it was kind of, you know, that expectation wasn't necessarily there. I just kind of took it on as a challenge and did the best I could. So that's Andean Abyss. In terms of the overall design, the other one I would mention is Nevsky, which not coincidentally is also the first in a series. Yep. And the issue there, so I'm doing a lot of new things that are departing from anything else I'd done or almost anything that I knew. I was stealing some ideas. We can talk about that in a bit. In fact, we will. But I was also on my own. You know, it was again where with Andean Abyss, when I was doing Andean Abyss, the core design, I had Joel Toppin as my developer, and he had developed Labyrinth with me. And of course, Joel is a talented designer in his own right, as well as being a talented developer. So I had a lot of help with Andean Abyss and how we would do the core game from Joel. So on Nevsky, I really was on my own. I didn't know like a lot of Russian war gamers that I could go out, and I didn't know any, you know, Teutons who had lived on the Baltic frontier. You know, I'm reading the sources. I'm, you know, I'm not a professional historian, and I'm doing the best I can to think, well, how did this work? You know, how did warfare at the operational level on the Baltic frontier in the 13th century work to then, you know, translate that into war game mechanics, right? Yeah. And there I'm very proud of not only how it came out, but how it was received. That I thought this is a real specialty kind of, you know, who besides me cares about operational level warfare on the 13th century Baltic frontier. You know, it's kind of like insurgency and counterinsurgency in Colombia. You know, what wargamer cares about that, right? And it was, but it had a great, I thought, for me, surprisingly good reception, a surprisingly wide reception. And of course, now it stood the test of time where we have, again, after that, once I had done Nevsky, then other talent comes in and we can go in new directions, and it
Yeah.
becomes.
We've got the whole Levy Campaign Discord. I mean, there's just a community
Yes.
now of developers, designers, playtesters.
Right.
You've got a whole neighborhood really to work with now.
Which is so powerful, you know. And so Discord is such a wonderful medium for that kind of collaboration. And we've now done things like Plantagenet from Paco Gradija, and soon to come out Seljuk, you know, from Justin Fazzino. And I was involved in those, you know, but they have solved problems in new ways that make those better than Nevsky, right? We're getting better as we go. And so that's easy for me. Hard is that first step alone, you know, into the abyss.
And what about your easiest one? Is there one that,
so along those lines, I was thinking about that. Tell me if this surprises you. Fire in the Lake.
Yes, absolutely. Because to me, when I hear of, maybe it's just a naive conclusion I'm drawing, but you know, when people talk about coin games, people often mention how much they love Fire in the Lake. They often mention that it's one of the more challenging coin games to play and learn. Its complexity is perhaps a level higher than some of the other coin games. At least that's my perception of it. So when you mention Fire in the Lake as being the easiest, it seems there's a contradiction there. Wouldn't a more complex game to design be harder, be more of a grind to put together? Yeah.
And and the answer to that is all of that help that's involved. Okay. Because this is now volume 4. Yeah. And volume 2, you know, I already had a co-designer, and I had somebody helping with the bots and so forth and so on. Then volume 3, now I'm going to focus on volume 3 of Distant Plain because it's very pertinent to the ease of doing Fire in the Lake. So volume 3 of Distant Plain is about Afghanistan, you know, round up to 2013, but modern insurgency and counterinsurgency in Afghanistan. And for that, among all the other help, I had my co-designer, Brian Train, who is, you know, to me, the premier designer of internal wars, insurgency type war games. So he's my co-designer, and he picked the topic. I mean, I told him, I said, you do a game with me, do a coin series game with me, Brian. You can pick whatever insurgency you want. He said, okay, we're doing Afghanistan. I said, okay. So that makes that very, very easy, because I don't have to have any expertise on Afghanistan. If somebody, you know, questions something, I say, well, go ask Brian. You know, so it's very easy, right? And when we work through how the factions interact, and particularly the partnership between the coalition, the external expeditionary counterinsurgency, and the government of Afghanistan, the domestic counterinsurgency, you think about that relationship as a bad marriage. We worked a lot of that out in A Distant Plain. I get to Fire in the Lake. Now I've got, you know, secret weapon, not so secret, Mark Herman. Mark Herman, who had read and forgotten more books about the Vietnam War than I even had heard of, okay, who had been wanting to do a Vietnam war game for decades and not gotten around to it, you know. And now we're going to do it as coin series. And I think the model that we had in the coin series and for A Distant Plain is applied very well. Like we didn't have to change that much. Like I would say to Mark, okay, here's how it worked in A Distant Plain. You know, there's the government and they do this, and the coalition they do that, and here are the victory conditions. And Mark says, yeah, that's like the U.S. and the South Vietnamese, and it fits. Why? Because it's another U.S.-led expeditionary counterinsurgency. And in Afghanistan, we're rediscovering all the lessons that we learned in Vietnam, you know? And so it was easy to kind of backfit those mechanics and have them be loyal to Mark Herman's model, which is a highly credible mental model of the Vietnam War. Right. So we had that. Plus, we have GMTs. We have Gene saying, well, the coin series is successful. Mark Herman's, this is a Mark Herman co-design. Mark Herman's name is going to be on the box with Volko, you know, resources, right? So you know, we were like, oh, we could do some more events, because Mark is just thinking of, well, there's this event, there's that event. You could do all these cards. Like he would think of what these event cards would be. And I then kind of took that interpretation of the importance of this thing from from Mark, and I kind of engineer, and I did the under chassis sort of how do you engineer this into coin, mechanics and text, right? So it was a good rhythm in that way. And Gene just said, well, if you want to have 120 events, go ahead,
Right.
whatever, we'll print them. We're like, oh, great. Well, we can add another 30 events. And that's easy. If it's kind of like life, if you have a lot of money, everything's easy.
Yeah.
I find, if
Matthew,
you have less money, everything gets harder, So same thing here. We had the resources from the publisher. I had, arguably the most, influential war game designer, working with me. And I had all that fundament of 3 previous volumes, including, an expeditionary counterinsurgency in a distant plane that was informed by Brian Train. So, so the Brian Train spirit is in Fire in the Lake as well.
A perfect confluence of resources and design and experience all coming together. That's fascinating. I would never have guessed that.
If I had failed at that, I wouldn't even be on your show now, would I? I would be terrible, of course.
It's obvious. It's so many people mention it as being, their favorite game or one of their favorite games, and just or the coin series that's reached so many accolades. Often, when you ask what's your favorite coin game, people mention Fire in the Lake. It seems to always float to the top of a number of conversations. So it clearly came out a great success.
Yeah, and of course the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. It's just such a fascinating, rich, well-documented topic that people are, that our community of gamers is interested in. Yeah. So it's got that going for it as well. Vietnam, Mark Herman, GMT Games.
Yeah.
You don't like that? Who doesn't like that?
And it adds, I think, the political aspect of the war too, which is something that's harder to model in a traditional hex encounters numbers-based game. Yeah. And
I will say this. I think I learned a little better how to do that. I like the way Fire in the Lake does those political relationships a little better than the way A Distant Plane does. And that's no knock on what we were doing in volume 3. It's just, I try to learn as I go. And so there were some, I thought, rougher edges in volume 3 that I had a chance to smooth with Mark in volume 4 in Fire in the Lake. And so I also think, because it's a later volume, it does that better. But that kind of design refinement is not so hard. It's, again, you've got the great fundament and you're just, you're just tightening a few bolts.
Right. Yeah. The iteration is probably easier than the initial surge of energy to get the thing going. Yeah.
That's it. All right.
We jump up to number 5 on our list.
765.
Yes.
Angola. All right. So Angola, here we go. So this is just a monument to me, a monument to innovation, not just because of what's in it today, but this design is from, what year this design is from? What would you guess?
Is it
Do you know?
1999?
1988.
Oh, it's that old.
It's that old, Ragnar Brothers.
Okay.
And
I knew it was old. I didn't know it was that old.
Yeah, it is really old. Now, and you got to think of the 1980s and war games and like what topics were we doing, right? World War II, American Civil War, Napoleon, there isn't that much. And here's one on the first year or so of the Civil War in Angola, 1970. So it's not being done by a big house. It's being done it's not a very good looking game, I have to say, but I would say a cult following. And that was it. It wasn't really noticed for what was in it. And then thank you, MMP, for doing this, for producing in a beautiful nation, to bring it to people. By the way, the counter art for this, do you know who did it?
I do not know. No.
Lee Brimcombe Wood, Burning Blue designer. He actually did the counter art and some of the counter and card art in Angola, and it's great. It's just awesome. Anyway, so we have this oddball topic from an oddball publisher, little known, and it does some certain things so extremely cleverly and well that it is a crime that nobody stole from this design for so many decades until I did. So one thing that, let's, first of all, the topic, Angola. So this is a Cold War cockpit, right? This is the Soviet bloc and the US bloc, and they're fighting the Soviets mainly via the Cubans, the Western, the free world bloc, South Africa and CIA and others. Anyway, so they're battling back and forth, and you kind of think about like Twilight Struggle as the context, and Angola or some other low stability, like a 1 stability, I think, right, spot. And the two players are like, each one's like, I need to control Africa, so I'm going to put in a little more here, a little more influence, whatever. So that's what's going. Now take that idea in Twilight Struggle, and you're zooming in to operationally, well, how does that play out on the ground in that country? That's Angola. The Portuguese are just pulling out, so it's the decolonization has happened, and now all of the rebel factions are going to vie for wherever they stand after the war with Portugal, wherever they stand on the ground on the map, they start vying for control of the country because they've been supported by these opposing Cold War blocs, and it becomes this Cold War contest. Okay, so that's in the game design, and it says great topic for game. This is a 4-player game, but it's 2v2. It's 2 teams, right? So you have the pro-Soviet factions and the pro-Western factions, and they're battling for the future of Angola. Okay, but 4 players, that gets and it's just really interesting rules for team play. Again, very innovative. But a cool thing for gameplay is that the premise is that neither side, neither Moscow nor Washington, are really that interested in Angola, right? They don't really care what happens to the people of Angola or to governments in Angola. What they care about is not losing Angola on their watch, okay? So that means if one side is losing and it looks like the other side is going to lock in control of Angola in Twilight Struggle terms, then the other side kicks up the aid, kicks up the covert aid, okay? So that you get like, well, we don't have to win Angola. We just don't want to lose, right? So give us some more tanks or something, right? Yeah. So now think about that from gameplay. You've got this tug of war going on. You're battling for the different towns and cities, and one side just turn and start. The other side, oh, you have a turn? Well, candy. You get the cool units or whatever coming in. And there's this historical self-balancing mechanism, right, that keeps this civil war going. And in fact, of course, the civil war goes on for years and years and years, right, for that reason. So it's also a kind of a cool commentary on the effect of the Cold War on these post-colonial internal struggles, right?
Well, I know it's showing up. I've seen it at conferences still, and that's why I thought it was new. I knew it was an older game, but to go back that far in time, you see a lot of people. Play it.
I mean, when did MMP redo it? Let's see. I don't see the year on it, but anyway. But yeah, so
2012.
2012. Okay, yeah, great. So like Andean Abyss, we start. It kind of you can see this door opening on different regions and how interesting the stories are that we can tell of these various underrepresented conflicts, and this is one of them. Yeah. And so here's another really cool thing about the idea is we're busted up in these factions. We're scrambling in the first months of a new civil war. We're shifting, instead of attacking the colonial overseer who's pulling out, we're attacking each other. We're scattered over the map wherever we happen to, the war that left us. So you start with this cool random situation every time. And we're not really very good at this, right? We're kind of finding our way. We're just starting this new war against each other. And so our coordination between partners is not so great either. So a lot of rules that had to do with how do the 2 players on each side work together. There's limits on kind of what what you're communicating. And also, there's a command and control system that limits how effectively you can plan what you're going to do in the coming turn. And what it's called in Angola is column cards. So you have some cards, you play a certain number of them, but you basically, ahead of the turn, you're secretly stacking them into a little deck. And you select which ones. And then you've got columns, units, A, B, C, and so forth. And you're going to stack these column cards, and you're going to flip one up when it's your turn, and it's going to say column A. And all you can do and all you will do on your move is you can move column A or nothing. So first of all, as we're going around the 4 players, it makes it really quick, right? Everybody together plans their turn, stacks it, right? And now when it's your turn, you're not moving tons of units all up and down the map. Column A can move now if you want. Do you want to move or not? And and when you move it, that's an attack too. It's very, very quick and simple. But what happens is, of course, if I've put down 7 cards and I get to my 5th card and 6th card and I flip over column A, the situation operationally on the map has totally changed. I'm locked into that plan, right?
Yeah.
I'm not locked into what I do with column A, but it's column A's turn now. And right now, column A got destroyed. Or column A is garrisoning an important city that is now under threat that wasn't before and can't move. It's got to stay there and whatever. Anyway, so very quickly, your plan fails to survive contact with the enemy, right? And it's very vivid in this very simple, quick, evocative, powerful column cards planning mechanism. Like you think modern Eurogames, there's a lot of we're planning out different moves and there's plan. So this is a 1988 historical war game planning mechanism that works beautifully. That, as far as I know, nobody stole until I did.
Nevsky, right?
That's
because you stack all your lords together, and then
so
you get halfway through your turn, it's like, I don't want this guy to move anymore, but it's like, well,
exactly the same, right? So, and they have some maybe little twists on it that are not in Angola, whatever, but it's the same thing. It's the same idea. That's where the idea comes from. I call them command cards. And here, I'm not trying to tell you in Nevsky about what are the difficulties of coordinating a civil war in the Third World when you're just starting out. As a faction within a larger movement. I'm saying it's the Middle Ages. You don't have radios. You do, councils of war maybe, or you exchange some couriers. And by the way, this is not a rigid military hierarchy. This is a social system. There's a lack of trust between lords. You have your own fiefdom, and the coordination is rough, right? And so I basically borrowed the same mechanic from Angola to bring across that inflexibility of communications and command and control in the medieval operational context. And I think it works very well. Anyways, in Angola, it's just delicious, and folks need to try. That was
a great, the detailed look at it. I was not aware. I know it's fantastically popular at conferences. People love to play it. It pops up
and I have talked about a fraction of the cool, innovative stuff in that game. Right. And it's not overwrought. I mean, it's all simple rules. It's very accessible. There's just everything in it is like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for watching the first half of this interview. I'll put a link to the second half as soon as it's ready right here. Have a great day.